Have you ever walked through your front door after spending hours with other people and felt even lonelier than when you left? Imagine this. You meet a few close friends for dinner. The conversation is easy. Everyone laughs at the right moments. Before leaving, someone pats you on the shoulder and says, "We should do this again soon." You smile. You agree. Then you drive home in silence. As you unlock your front door, a strange thought quietly appears. Why do I still feel so alone? Not because no one was there, but because, somehow, no one truly saw you. This is one of the most confusing experiences a person can have. From the outside, your life looks connected. You have conversations, relationships, and people who care about you. Yet deep inside, there's a growing sense that the most important parts of who you are remain invisible. Psychologists call this emotional loneliness. It's a form of loneliness that has very little to do with being alone, and almost everything to do with feeling unknown. So how does someone become emotionally lonely while surrounded by people? And could the answer have less to do with the world around us than the quiet stories we've learned to tell ourselves? Let's explore the hidden psychology behind one of the most invisible forms of human loneliness. For a long time, the person in our story believed they simply needed to meet more people, so they accepted every invitation. They stayed busy. They filled their calendar with birthdays, dinners, weekend trips, and endless conversations. Yet every time they returned home, the silence felt strangely familiar. It wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of carrying thoughts that had never been spoken. This is where many people misunderstand loneliness. We tend to think loneliness begins when we're physically alone, but some of the deepest loneliness appears in the middle of ordinary life, while sitting across from someone you love, laughing with close friends, or answering the daily question, "How are you?" Because sometimes, "I'm good," is simply the shortest way to end a conversation that feels too difficult to begin. Psychologists describe this experience as emotional loneliness. Unlike social isolation, emotional loneliness isn't measured by how many people surround you. It's measured by how deeply you feel known. You can share your time with many people while quietly believing that no one truly understands the thoughts you never say out loud. And that's what makes emotional loneliness so invisible. From the outside, nothing seems wrong. Inside, it can feel as though you're slowly disappearing behind the version of yourself everyone else already knows. If that's true, then the real question isn't why we're surrounded by people. It's why feeling truly seen can become so difficult in the first place. When psychologists try to understand emotional loneliness, they rarely begin by asking how many friends a person has. Instead, they ask a different question. When did it first become difficult to let someone truly know you? Imagine our character again. This time, they're no longer sitting alone after dinner with friends. They're 8 years old. They've had a difficult day at school. Maybe they were embarrassed in front of the class. Maybe they felt left out. Maybe something happened that they don't even have the words to explain. They walk through the front door, carrying something much heavier than a backpack. For a brief moment, they hope someone will notice. Someone will ask. Someone will simply say, "You don't seem like yourself today. Do you want to talk?" But the question never comes. Life is busy. Dinner needs to be prepared. Homework needs to be finished. Tomorrow arrives, and the feeling quietly slips away, at least on the surface. Moments like these don't automatically create emotional loneliness. Every childhood is imperfect, and no parent responds perfectly every time. But when a child repeatedly learns that difficult emotions are ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood, the mind begins to adapt. Not because it wants to become distant, but because it wants to stay safe. Over time, that adaptation can become almost invisible. Instead of saying, "I'm hurting," they learn to say, "I'm okay." Instead of asking for comfort, they convince themselves they shouldn't need it. Years later, the child has become an adult. They know how to keep conversations going. They know how to make other people feel comfortable. They know how to listen. But when the conversation turns toward their own inner world, something quietly stops them. Not because they have nothing to say, but because somewhere deep inside, they've learned that silence feels safer than disappointment. Psychologists describe these early emotional patterns through attachment theory. Our first relationships often become the blueprint for what we expect from later ones. They don't determine our future, but they can shape the quiet assumptions we carry into adulthood, assumptions about whether vulnerability brings closeness or pain, and those assumptions often stay with us far longer than we realize. The strange thing about emotional loneliness is that it doesn't simply leave us feeling disconnected. It slowly changes the way we relate to everyone around us. Let's return to our character. A close friend notices something is off. You've seemed quiet lately. For a brief second, they consider telling the truth, how exhausted they've been, how empty everything has felt, how they're beginning to wonder if anyone really knows them at all. But then another voice quietly interrupts. Don't make things awkward. They probably won't understand. Just smile. So they do. The conversation moves on. Their friend leaves believing everything is fine, and our character walks away, believing no one truly cared enough to ask again. This is how emotional loneliness quietly feeds itself, not through dramatic rejection, but through ordinary moments where fear speaks louder than honesty. Every time we hide what we're feeling, we protect ourselves from one possible outcome, the pain of being misunderstood. But we also close the door to another possibility, being deeply understood. Over time, this becomes less of a decision and more of a habit. Eventually, we stop expecting people to understand us because we've stopped giving them the chance to. Here's the paradox. The longer emotional loneliness lasts, the more convincing it becomes. It whispers that no one could ever understand you, yet that belief is often built from conversations that never truly happened. This is what makes emotional loneliness so powerful. It doesn't just make us feel alone, it quietly teaches us to expect loneliness. And once that expectation takes root, we begin interpreting the world through it. A delayed reply becomes proof that we don't matter. A distracted conversation feels like rejection. Silence begins to sound personal. Psychologists often describe this as a shift in perception. The mind, trying to protect us from future disappointment, becomes increasingly alert to signs of disconnection, while overlooking moments of genuine care. The greatest tragedy of emotional loneliness isn't that no one loves us. It's that, over time, we stop believing anyone possibly could. And when that belief settles in, the walls keeping loneliness out become the very walls keeping connection from getting in. Sometimes, the most important question isn't, how do I stop feeling emotionally lonely? It's something much quieter. What is this feeling trying to tell me? We often treat loneliness as an enemy, something to escape, distract ourselves from, or hide behind a busy life. But emotions rarely exist without a purpose. Fear tells us something feels unsafe. Sadness reminds us that something meaningful has been lost. And emotional loneliness may be asking us to notice a need we've spent years overlooking. Not the need to be surrounded by more people, but the need to be known. Think about our character one last time. Nothing around them has changed overnight. They haven't suddenly found the perfect friend or entered the perfect relationship. Their life looks almost exactly the same. The only difference is this. For the first time, they stop asking, "Why doesn't anyone understand me?" and begin asking, "Have I ever allowed anyone to truly know me?" That question isn't meant to create guilt. It's meant to create possibility. Because genuine connection doesn't begin the moment someone says the perfect words. It begins the moment two people feel safe enough to stop performing for each other. Sometimes that starts with a single honest sentence, a truth you've rehearsed 100 times in your mind but never spoken aloud. A quiet admission of, "I'm not doing as well as I pretend." Moments like these rarely change a life overnight, but they often change its direction. Because every act of honest vulnerability challenges the old belief that being seen will only lead to disappointment. And little by little, what once felt dangerous can begin to feel like home again. Perhaps one day, our character will meet those same friends again. They'll laugh at the same jokes, share another meal, walk through the same front door. But maybe one small thing will be different. Maybe, instead of carrying every feeling home alone, they'll choose to let someone see a little more of the person behind the smile. Because emotional loneliness doesn't always begin when we're surrounded by too few people. Sometimes, it begins the moment we stop believing it's safe to be fully known. And perhaps healing doesn't begin the day someone finally understands us. Perhaps it begins the day we risk believing that we are worth understanding. If this video helped put words to a feeling you've struggled to explain, consider subscribing for more explorations into the hidden psychology behind everyday life.